Next from Springfield, freshman Republican Congressman Rodney Davis talks to the Springfield Chamber of Commerce about the Republican legislative agenda, what he's personally pushing, and why he feels there is an opportunity for greater cooperation in Congress in the months ahead. This runs about 40 minutes.
It's an honor for me to be here as a member of Congress. The work that I was tasked to do years ago with Congressman Shimkus to work with the Springfield Chamber of Commerce, it makes an event like this for me very humbling, very much an honor. Josh is probably worried about what I'm going to say, as he always has been, but I'm a little more tapered now. They tape it. Yeah, exactly. And we're also joined, so talking of educational institutions, before I forget, we're joined by the proud grandfather of twin grandsons, right? Ed Wojcicki from UIS, too. He snuck in after we did the introductions. Yeah.
You know about twins.
I do. I do. My twin boys who are 12 were not happy with me this morning. Parenting. Yes. And my 16-year, since we're talking about family, many of you know, from Taylorville. I mean, I'm a small town guy. I grew up in Taylorville, grew up working in a small business. My mom and dad ran a restaurant. My dad and brother still do. I grew up learning how decisions in Springfield and Washington impact the way you run your businesses, the decisions that you have to make on a daily basis. That actually gave me an appreciation for public policy. So much so that when I went away to college, I came back, told my dad, Dad, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to pick up trash at age 7 around the construction site and start working for you when I was in junior high and all through high school and college. But I'd like to try this public service route, public policy. And a week after I graduated from college 20 years ago, I met someone you may know. His name's John Shimkus. And for the last 16 years, I've been working with him on a wide variety of your issues, where I've met most of you. Lou, thanks for letting us join you in the Lou Dixon conference room today. I saw it took 3 Hanson representatives to outmatch you in your own room. Thank you, Jim. But it's an opportunity this is an opportunity that I cherish, because I want to hear from you. I mean, I can stand up here and pontificate about what's going on in Washington for hours, and your eyes will glaze over before mine do. But there are a lot of issues that we need to tackle in Washington. And as Todd said, Todd's a longtime friend of mine, somebody we've worked with now for 20 years. And Todd, thank you for recognizing the fact that I am glad I'm not in Springfield. I think it's more of a disaster than Washington, D.C. But the message I want to start with today is there's hope. I mean, I really see hope in Washington to actually come together on some major common sense solutions. The fact that we have a lot of rank and file members of both parties that want to get beyond what we've seen over the last 4 to 6 years, which is just polarization. It seems like there are many issues, many major issues that were put forth before Congress, and they all were used as political hammers. And that's it. There were no bipartisanship. There were no common sense solutions. There were no negotiations sitting around at tables like this and coming up with a plan of action that both sides are happy with, that both sides take a victory lap. And I find myself in Washington sometimes using my experience working for another member of Congress to educate many members who have only served during these times of polarization and let them know that Congress can govern. I mean, I think back to the stuff I used to take for granted. The first few months I started working for Congressman Shimkus, we saw the same type of polarization, the same type of disgust with Washington, whereas nobody thought Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich could figure out where to sit on Air Force One, let alone come together with an agreement. And what did we have overnight? Seemingly overnight, we had the balanced budget agreement in 1987. It took projected deficits for 10 years and turned them into surpluses because people sat around the table and they laid out their framework. And Ben, I hate to disagree with you in my opening remarks a little bit, but I do believe the fact that there's a House framework that's passed, which is the House version of their vision for America versus the Senate's version of their vision for America, something they haven't done in 4 years. Now, we had to force their hand a little bit by telling them they wouldn't get paid if they went into a 5th year. It's amazing what happens when you use salary as a leverage point. But the fact is, they passed their budget. And yes, they're two distinct, different visions for America, but what did you expect? They're frameworks. They're laying out a plan of action. Now, does anyone believe that either side is going to be able to pass theirs completely? Absolutely not. But it's a starting point to say, here's what we believe in. Here's what we think is going to work. Now let's come together and find out what's going to work, just like Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich did. There's 2 more steps that we have to take through this process. I mean, this laying out a budget is just laying out a plan of action. Nothing more, nothing less. There's no money attached, there's no law, there's no legislation that says anything that they've passed on either side is going to be implemented. But the fact is, before we even get to the authorization process, and before we even get to the 3rd step, the appropriations process, we've got both sides laying out a framework. That shows me there's hope. And another reason why there's hope is the President, for the first time, that many of my colleagues that have been there for a few terms can remember, he came to see us as a Republican conference, which I think is a big step. Now, I've got a lot of naysayers in my caucus that say, well, you know, he doesn't mean it. He's just coming here to just check a box and then walk back and say, I did this. Well, being a freshman, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that the steps he's taking show that he wants to have a legacy, and we want to have a legacy too. And that legacy, hopefully, is going to be working together to come up with good, common sense, bipartisan solutions. Now, I had the opportunity to talk to him as he was leaving the State of the Union. I'll admit, even in front of reporters, I was trying to leave, and I couldn't get out of my own House chamber. I sat in the rear of the House on the Democrat side, right next to Dan Lipinski. Dan Lipinski asked me to sit by him. That's become vogue now to sit, you know, instead of just on one side or the other, sit together. And I think it's a great idea. Dan and I sat and chit-chatted a little bit during the speech about a few different issues. But after the speech, I was trying to work my way out to go talk to some media folks. You know, I don't know who any of those would be. But I had a chance to, what I thought, to exit out the main door, but they closed it up. Some guy, president, was coming down the aisle. So I thought I could work myself around through the back door before his entourage clogged up the center aisle. I didn't make it. So I said, you know what, this is a great opportunity to say hello. And I stood up on the aisle, stood up on our side of the aisle, and after giving my old friend Terry Gaynor a few different jokes and jabs, the next thing I know, President Obama is standing right in front of me. I said, sir, it's very nice to see you. I'm Rodney Davis. I'm one of the new guys from Illinois. And he said, what can I do for you? I said, well, I'd like to take you up on your offer that you made today at a press conference when you offered members of Congress the opportunity to stop by any time if we had bipartisan solutions we could bring you. So I'd like to take you up on that offer. And he smiled and said, come on by. Well, we've asked. I don't have security clearance yet. As Josh would tell you, he probably doesn't blame him. But, you know, I think that'll happen. And we've talked with his staff, we've met with his folks, and I'd like to bring some freshman members so that they can get to know the president on a personal level. Because after that initial conversation, he asked me, where's your district? Well, I said Springfield, of course, knowing what his next response was going to be was I spent a lot of time there. I said, I know. That's where we met. I met you when you were a state senator a couple of times, and also when you were a U.S. senator. And we conversed a little back and forth. And I can remember this point distinctly. He grabbed Sheila Jackson Lee's, and the video may not play this out as well, but hopefully I'm right. But I remember him grabbing Sheila Jackson Lee's copy of his speech. And as he signed it, he looked over at me and he said, well, you're not from Springfield, are you? I said, no, sir, I'm from Taylorville. And we talked about mutual friends of ours in Taylorville. And it hit me later, the symbolism of that event. I mean, here it is, the President of the United States walking down the center aisle of the most divided organization in America, the U.S. Congress. And he and I are talking about Springfield and Taylorville and putting it on a personal level. That's the hope I see, is the fact that he came in to put himself out there personally. And we've put ourselves out there personally, which gives us a much better opportunity to get beyond the politics and the polarization and get around a table like this and begin to bring some common sense solutions forward. I have hope. I hope it plays out, because there are a lot of naysayers on both sides, but the rank and file members of my freshman class on both sides of the aisle, most of them agree with me. We need to work together. We've got to get some of these fiscal crises off our plate, because it sucks the energy completely out of the room when we need to deal with some major issues that have not been addressed. Transportation reauthorization, including WRDA. For those of you who don't know what WRDA is, it's Water Resource Development Act. I know the acronyms because I had to work in them. But I'm on the Committee of Jurisdiction for both of those. Very important to our local economy to address those two issues. We need to address a long-term farm bill. We need to address... You ready?
Yeah.
All right. We need to address immigration reform. Major issues that get pushed to micro status because all we hear are artificial deadlines, fiscal cliffs, sequestration. Let's move forward. That's why these budgets are crucial to that process moving forward. And I see that optimism so that we can begin to push forward. Now, Ben mentioned transportation issues, one of my committees, transportation infrastructure. I'm really excited that Bill Schuster, the new chairman, had faith in me to name me a vice chairman of one of the subcommittees, vice chairman of aviation. So the fact that we've seen the implementation of sequestration adversely impact our local airports, it concerns me. I agree with Mark Hanna that this is concerning for the entire aviation industry. And I find it, this is where I lose some of my optimism, because when I see how the sequestration cuts are being implemented by the administration, it frustrates me that it seems that many are just based upon causing as much pain as possible. Closing the White House, it's a self-guided tour. I mean, come on. The Secret Service is going to be there anyway. There are ways. Then they say, well, we don't have the flexibility to administer this like you say you want us to. I believe they do. But we've tried to give them that flexibility by codifying it in law. Oh, no, we don't want that. We don't want you to do that. The FAA, for example, they decided to close the Bloomington Tower and Decatur Tower, both in my district. Very disappointing when you see that they spend over $500 million a year on consultants and travel and conferences. You got some flexibility there. A lot of flexibility. It hit me, and the reason I say this with such surety is on my other committee, the Committee on Agriculture, I had Secretary Vilsack in front of our committee a few weeks ago. And I asked Secretary Vilsack why he was telling us that he's going to furlough employees the same day that 400 new job vacancies came open in the federal government. Same day. Okay, the optics are terrible on that. Whether or not you're going to fill them, the optics are terrible. So I drilled it down a little further. I said 3 of those were for bollworm researchers in Phoenix, Arizona. I thought I asked him a simple question. Are you going to fill those? To me, the answer would have been, not until you guys figure this out. Instead, I got a lecture. He got a little angry at me. He said he's at 08 levels of funding. And he ended by saying he doesn't have the flexibility to make that decision. Well, the whole hearing that we had been conducting was based on how do we give you that flexibility? We're trying to do that. Now, Secretary of Agriculture doesn't have the flexibility of whether or not to hire 3 bollworm researchers in Phoenix, Arizona. That's a problem, okay? He's the Secretary of Ag. He should be able to say, I'm going to hire this many people or I'm not going to hire this many people. The fact that he couldn't tell me that he could not fill those, that's a bigger problem than what we even see here with sequestration. But I learned a lesson that day too, because right after he said that he doesn't have the flexibility, I was going to already hit my talk button to say that's what we're trying to do. And from the back of the room, I heard, "Will the gentleman from Illinois yield to the chairman?" The answer to that in Washington is always yes. All right? He asked the question that I wanted to ask, and he took it upon himself to then say, "Mr. Secretary, this is what we're trying to do. This is exactly what we're trying to give you the opportunity to do, to implement 2% cut, 2 cents on every dollar that the federal government spends," which is what the sequestration cuts are. But 2% is devastating the way they've got it. They've got it implemented. It's bad policy. Sequestration, across-the-board cuts, are laziness, sheer and utter laziness. We have a lot of smart people in Congress that we ought to be able to go line by line through the federal budget and figure out what our priorities are. That's why you have to lay out the framework at first, to lay out the priorities. And when we do, we can then begin to say, okay, here's where we can cut. Because a 2% cut of the Department of Defense is a lot more difficult for the hardworking taxpayers of this area. And you forgot Scott Air Force Base, and you forgot all the Boeing employees that live in my district that work across the river in St. Louis that are being adversely affected. 2% of defense is a lot harder on our economy, on our local economy, than 2% of the GSA. You don't make across-the-board cuts in your businesses. When you've had to make tough decisions, you go in and you find out where you can cut a little more in areas that can cut a little less. That's called being a decision maker, running your business, running your family. Congress ought to do the same. The fact that sequestration was so unpalatable when it was brought up, and now some people just shrug their shoulders, it tells you how far we've gone in a bad way, how far we've turned back from being able to sit around this table. But I still believe that the steps are in place, that we're moving beyond the polarization and getting to the point where we can then begin to talk about the details of a transportation reauthorization, the details of a farm bill, the details of worded reauthorization, the details of immigration reform. And the opening discussion proves my point that we're beginning to work in a bipartisan way to make some of these things at least get out on the table. And that's the first step. So with that, thank you for letting me join you today. I want to hear from you. Let me know the questions you want to answer. Make them good. Charlene?
When are we going to quit wasting so much money on the TSA? They're impacting my people's productivity. People that will not fly because of them, they will drive. So these airport closures really don't matter. I own a diplomatic security firm in Rome, Italy.
Yep.
They're about as useful as probably a splinter. When are we going to see some common sense on that? They're wasting millions.
That's the first time I've heard that phrase, as useful as a splinter. I like that. Yeah. I do. I see TSA a lot for obvious reasons. Yeah. I commute by airplane now rather than by car. From Taylorville to Springfield, now I go from Taylorville to St. Louis, or Taylorville to Springfield, or Taylorville to Bloomington, and out to D.C. I think there are a lot of good, hardworking people that work for the TSA. I do believe that. You've got some good people that are there, and I see them on a regular basis. Many of the problems that that folks experience with the TSA are policy decisions made from on high in Washington that they have to follow. And I'll tell you, sometimes the local agents, their hands are tied. Their hands are tied. I'll give you an example here in Springfield. I was trying to get out to Washington as a candidate, and you try and pump as many events into the day as you can, so I didn't make the half-hour window. I could see them boarding the plane that I needed to get on, and I could not get through security because I had yet to get a boarding pass. A fine Springfield policeman went over after I asked TSA agents to go over and tell them that I'd like to get on the plane. It took a local Springfield law enforcement officer to go tell the agent that he had one more passenger who he was glad to get on. I wasn't a member of Congress. I wasn't out there throwing a fit. I just said, is there any way that you can just tell him he's got one more passenger here? And it worked. So they couldn't go do that because of instructions and policies put in place by the federal bureaucracy in Washington. They couldn't leave their posts. I find that frustrating. I really do. And that's why we have to change the way that the policies are in place so that they have more flexibility to actually do their jobs rather than to do their job of protecting our passengers. Now, I can remember after September 11th, there was a lot of discussion. I would go to meetings like this and talk about airport security, airline security. The facts are, every single weapon that was used on 9/11 was legal to take on a plane at that time. Nobody thought the carnage that happened that day would have happened. Flight attendants and pilots were told to give up the plane to hijackers. That's what you did. Then acquiesced to their demands later. Who would have thought those terrorists could take down a flight with box cutters? So the typical knee-jerk reaction is, let's let the federal government take over. And I remember saying, well, do we really want the federal government to take over airline security? Oh, I would go to Kiwanis Club. I can remember a specific one in a Lions Club meeting in Hillsborough, Illinois in 2001. And I laid out, do you want to create a federal bureaucracy? Do you want to have to pay for that? Do you want to have to deal with the inefficiency? And the answers I got in Hillsborough at that time were yes, absolutely we do. Hence, the growth, the Department of Homeland Security was a reaction to that. And now it's up to us to make some intermittent changes. Richard Hudson, a fellow freshman of mine, is the subcommittee chair on Homeland Security. And he deals with the TSA issues. He's somebody that I sit right next to on our agriculture committee, somebody who's a good friend, somebody I'm going to work with to make sure we can make some of those policy changes.
Rodney, on agriculture and transportation, the thing that joins them together is the lock and dams and trying to rebuild them on the Mississippi. A person in agriculture recently was pointing out to me that Panama, of all places, is rebuilding their lock and dam. But despite the fact that we have billions of dollars in trade going through the locks and dams on the Mississippi, we're still dealing with ones that are literally falling apart. What are the odds of getting funding for rebuilding those locks and dams?
Well, the odds increase greatly if we can come together to address some of the major fiscal issues I talked about. I mean, these are some of the issues that need to be put from micro status up to macro status. I will tell you, Terry, I wish we had at least a portion of the $80 billion that was spent in the stimulus bill on green energy programs, the same program that gave us the Solyndras and the Fisk of the world, and the losses that we've had. Imagine how many times we could have rebuilt the locks and dams along the Mississippi and Illinois with just a portion of that $80 billion. That is now part of our $16.6 trillion debt. We've got to make better financial decisions in Washington, and I think we will, as long as we can come together and work together. Now, I gave Terry this one. Media, let me get through everybody here, and I'll answer all your questions afterwards. Yes?
Is there any way of reining in the Department of Energy and the Department of Labor and the EPA? Because in the construction industry, some of the regulations they've dropped on us the last few years, it has just been burdensome, and they are driving up the cost of home building. You brought up the energy stimulus money. Illinois was I think one of only 9 states that jumped at that chance, and we did get our stimulus money, but there are stipulations with that to keep that money, we were told, and we're supposed to, in Illinois, prove 90% compliant with this new energy code that we have. And every year, the Department of Energy has charged the ICC, the International Code Council, with improving the code by 50% by the year 2015. So the new one just went into effect in 2012, and it was 15% better than the 9, which was 15% better than the 6. So hang on for the 15 because they have 20% to make up. We don't know where they're going to get it. And right now, it is a state law in Illinois, but it's unenforceable. The state doesn't have inspectors, And communities are not running into, they don't have it in their budget to be able to go and do more inspections at job sites. We have OSHA out here now that are really hitting job sites, and the EPA has implemented new lead-safe paint handling practices, and they are fining construction contractors $37,500 a day per incident if you get caught handling lead paint incorrectly. Is there any help you can give us?
Well, yes. Let me introduce a couple folks that are here. I know they said their names earlier, but Tim Butler. Tim, many of you know, was my cohort at many of these meetings over the years in his former job as a district chief of staff to Congressman Ray LaHood. So Tim runs all of our district operations, very well experienced. So if you've got an individual case where you need us to intervene with the Department of Labor, Department of Energy, or EPA on an issue that you think is unfair, get a hold of Tim. And also visiting from D.C., Bobby Frederick. Bobby's a Champaign native. Bobby's my legislative director out there. Proud to have him on my team. He's got a lot of experience working for former Congressman Tim Johnson and also former Congressman Bobby Schilling. Bobby's somebody who is very well respected within the agriculture and the transportation communities out there, and proud to have him here, proud to have him as part of our team. But those individual issues we can try and address on a case-by-case basis. But also, you mentioned the stimulus bill. Think back. That bill passed on a partisan roll call. The goal was to put almost $1 trillion into our economy as fast as possible. It's kind of like, let's just get it out there and we'll deal with figuring out how to implement it later. Anybody that thinks that the federal government is going to give dollars to a project, as Jim can attest and as Lou can attest, without asking for you to follow certain rules and regulations that you may or may not think are good for your business, it's one thing. It's kind of a be careful what you ask for. And that's what's happened in a lot of cases when you look at the stimulus bill. They threw out $1 trillion with the goal of lowering our unemployment to 5%. Unemployment was what at the time, 7.8? Just came out Friday, what is it? 7.7 nationwide. Much higher here in our district. Much higher. So spending $1 trillion on what was billed as an infrastructure bill, which was not an infrastructure bill, did not work. So it's up to us to change the policies. It's up to us to implement better policies in Washington to say, if you're going to spend $1 trillion, then let's look at what works. Let's look at what doesn't. Infrastructure, the infrastructure portion of the stimulus bill was what created the most jobs. Shocking. That's obvious. That's where you saw the real job creation. I'll leave you with one fact on the stimulus. Back in my previous job, I was tasked with tracking the stimulus for Mr. Shimkus. And I went to the White House website, which I believe cost, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, was it $18 million to produce for a website. Now, I'd like to have been that web developer. You could probably hire the best web developer in America for maybe, 1/18 of that? So I went to this website, which didn't have as many bells and whistles as I would think for an $18 million project. And I clicked on a spreadsheet. Yes, a spreadsheet that you could sort by congressional district. And at that point in time, I don't remember the exact date, but at that point in time, it listed the amount of money spent in the 19th District of Illinois, which was 30 counties in central and southeastern Illinois, and southwestern Illinois, was $541 million. The next column over, by their own metrics, those same metrics they expect you to follow as somebody who accepts the federal dollars, same metrics that Jim and Lou and their firms have to follow on every transportation project. 500, their metric of jobs created or saved in the next column was 543. Now, I don't mean to demean the math program in Taylorville, but that's about $1 million a job. So when you can't even get below $1 million a job with your own metrics, that tells me that program didn't work as well as intended. Great intentions, but that policy doesn't work. Our goal has to be to change the policy level You know, and that's what we have to do, is watch some of the regulatory burden that's being placed by this administration. There is a stack of all the new regulations. I think, Bobby, was it only the ACA regs that stood up about as tall as me? That's just the regulations that have been put in place for the Affordable Care Act. Add to that EPA, add to that energy, add to that others. It's not getting smaller, and our job is to rein that in, which is why I'm a co-sponsor of what they call the REINS Act, which would cause the administration to do a cost-benefit analysis of any new regulation that would cost $100 million. Yeah. See, that's why I got these guys. They keep my memory intact. But that's why I've done that. And you know, he hasn't had a chance to talk yet. But you know, Mayor, if there's anything you'd like to say on this or any of the other issues, I'd like to give you the floor.
I think you came to talk to business people, so I'll just let you talk enough in terms of railroads and high-speed rail and that type of thing. Isn't working in here?
No.
You know, one of the things, though, that, you know, with the FAA, and I think it's really important to realize that there's a lot of media coverage in terms of what took place Friday in terms of the release. Keep in mind, there are 3 sets of categories of towers. You've got the contract towers, which is actually what was released. You've got the ones that are shared cost, and you've got the FAA. They haven't released anything on the FAA towers themselves, and Springfield, along with some other cities in Illinois, are on the list that could be closed. At the very least, what we're talking about is having furlough days. And any way you look at it, when we talk in terms of aviation, you're removing eyes from people who are watching airlines that are flying in. And that's a very dangerous type of situation. So whether we're talking about closing our tower in Springfield or even reducing the number of people that we've got in there, it's going to have an effect on everybody's safety who flies in and out of Springfield. And I mean, that is really something I think that has been, you know, overlooked in terms of what the real impact of this is. This is a safety issue.
Yeah.
Is the closure in Bloomington going to affect the airport, like State Farm uses that airport all the time?
Yeah, it very well could, absolutely.
And we're trying to get them to stay in our state. I mean, they are going to stay in our state, but that's not good.
My understanding
it's
is
not.
that the Bloomington Airport will pick up the cost to hire those people themselves.
And here's, it gets more frustrating when you see that the overall impact on the FAA budget. When you look at the number of flights since 2008 are actually down. The air traffic is down. And they're saying that they would rather spend $500 million on consultants and travel within the own FAA agencies and their own fleet of jets, and instead furlough employees and close towers. That's bad administration of this policy. That's why they need to make better decisions. That's why it frustrates me as a policymaker that it all seems to be political when it comes to instituting these cuts. And when it impacts airline safety, it frustrates me, especially with my committee assignment. And if we see an impact, we will call Mr. Huerta, the chairman of FAA, in front of us and ask him how they're doing this. Hopefully he doesn't get mad at me like Secretary Vilsack did. But that's okay. Yes, sir, Mr. Skinner.
Congressman, your job is challenging. These local issues I think are important. But I think you've alluded to this, that they may not get addressed until the national issues get addressed. Mm-hmm. I hope you and your colleagues will focus on those national issues, because they're, you know, tearing down the country and going to stream down to everybody else. So, you know, the Obamacares and the national debt and all that is what I hope you guys focus on the most.
Well, thank you. And that's what we're trying to do. That's why I voted for our House Republican budget. that balances in 10 years. The Senate Democrat version that passed never balances. Never. Wouldn't you like to have a credit card like that? I mean, we're $16.6 trillion in debt. We've got to make some tough decisions. It's one of the things that I talked about during our entire campaign is I don't want to go to Washington just to play politics and make the easy decisions. There are some tough decisions that have to be made. And we have to be able to have the courage to make those tough decisions. And it's not, we're not going to be able to give everything to everyone. Now, you look at that budget. It balances in 10 years. The last Ryan budget balanced in 40 years. And I got that strung around my neck as a candidate, and I wasn't even in Congress. So you can just imagine what's going to happen. They're going to be coming out saying, Davis wants to take away this. Davis wants to take away that. Davis wants to kick people off of Medicare. Well, I leave it to all of you to remind folks that's not true. The fact of the matter is, the budget I just voted for doesn't touch Social Security, even though we have an insolvency problem in 2032 that still needs to be addressed. Medicare, it doesn't touch Medicare for anybody who's a Medicare beneficiary right now. So, you know, thinking here, Todd, you're almost a Medicare beneficiary, right? He's the one I knew the best I could joke with. It won't touch anybody who gets Medicare benefits right now. And if you're 55 and older, the system as we know it today is exactly the system that you're going to have. But what it also does is it still preserves and protects that same system for my generation and my kids' generation and for future generations. We'll still have that option, but we'll have a few more options too. I can't think of a better plan to say, we're not going to take it away for your generation or the next generation or future generations, but we're just going to give everybody some more options that will allow us to have some more cost-effective tools. We have to do it because in 11 years, Medicare's broke. And I don't know many seniors who are on Medicare like my dad who plan to die in the next 11 years and not need to use the Medicare benefits. So we have to do something, and this is a framework to make that happen.
Can I say one quick thing on ACA? And you're right that the regulatory battle is going to be where I think most of the focus rightly should be. And Todd implementing all the exchange pieces in 2014. But there's two pieces that we'll be at least pushing on. One may have a chance, I think, to pass, and they're both on the tax sides. They have nothing to do with providing health care. One is the medical device tax, a device on U.S. manufacturers of durable medical goods, 2.3% excise tax on sales, so not on profits, just on sales. That's going to get passed along. That's going to continue to, A, make our manufacturers less competitive, and B, increase costs in the system, which we're not trying not to do, obviously. So repealing that piece, repealing that tax, that already went into effect in January. The second one is the employer mandate, a mandate on all of you employers who in here is 50 employees or more. So couple, but you might be surprised because you might be over that threshold, adding up all of your part-time employees. But that will go into effect when the exchanges go into effect in 2014, requiring you to provide affordable health care deemed by the federal government for your employees or pay a fine. So that a repeal of that employer mandate piece and a repeal of that medical device piece are two things that we're going to be watching, and I think that the Congress is going to be potentially looking at as well. But I think that overall, probably ACA is here to stay. Hopefully we can chip away on the most onerous pieces. Well,
and thank you, Ben. You're right. You're right. Our job is to see how it's implemented and fix what I think are inevitable problems that are going to occur. The medical device tax, I'm co-sponsor of the bill that gets rid of that tax. I think it's devastating to our technological edge that we have in our healthcare system in this country. But I'll tell you, the implementation of the ACA and the implementation of Illinois' exchange is personal for me. Because remember back during the debate, they said, well, you got to make Congress follow the same rules as everybody else. Well, they did. I go on the exchange next year. I leave the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, which is the same benefit program that anybody at the local USDA office has. To me, a better solution would have been to take the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program, use that as a model, since it's a perfect model of selling insurance across state lines. It's a perfect model of being able to broaden your base of folks out to lessen your risk. Therefore, you have opportunities to to choose from more options. I'd like to have seen them bring that type of program to address our health care issues in this country so that we can cover pre-existing conditions, we can cover lifetime caps, we can cover 26-year-olds who still can't find a job being able to have access to health insurance. That would have been a great model. Instead, we have the ACA. Now, my wife, as many of you know, is a cancer survivor. This month is National Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. I urge you to make sure, if you have never gotten a colonoscopy, do it, because it saved my wife's life. She's now almost a 14-year survivor. I worry, how is my family going to be impacted by going onto this exchange? Many families in this district will have the exact same worries. There are answered questions. Now, the good news is there are a lot of members of Congress that are worried too in other states. The ironic thing is leadership doesn't have to follow the same rules. There's a little clause in there that if you're leadership, you don't have to go on the exchange. So you're going to see a lot more people running for leadership next year, I think. But there was an article in one of the DC magazines, one of the DC political magazines last week, about members of Congress are concerned about how the ACA is going to be implemented because they don't know how to answer the questions that are being asked of them by their own employees. So hopefully we'll get some answers. Hopefully the implementation process will be more clear for us, but in turn for everyone else, because there's so many unanswered questions about how this law is actually going to be put in place, let alone how it's going to be affordable, how it's going to reduce rates, which it hasn't done, and how it's going to be fully implemented. So, same concerns here that all of you have, and I urge you to let me know of instances of where it's adversely, the regulatory burden or the regulatory implementation of the ACA, how it impacts your business.
We said that we'd be done 10 minutes ago, but
Okay.
It's your clock. But so is there one more question from the group?
Before the evil media gets to ask theirs,
yeah.
We'll let you leave first. You'll never get out of here.
Ed?
We'll go 2 questions. I'll be brief in my comments.
Excuse me, Congressman, you spoke about the inflexibility of Homeland Security.
Yes, sir.
I like to point out that on the other side of the coin, there are veteran honor flights to Washington from over 100 cities and over 40 states. Homeland Security decided that veterans are not terrorists, and they go breeze through security. So they have demonstrated some flexibility.
Now, and that's great. And like I said, there are a lot of good people that work, but that's another instance where policy had to change from on high so that the agents could do what was right.
I think it was made by the head. I mean, he observed shakedowns of veterans and said, this is not right.
I wish Secretary Vilsack would have had the same type of response. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Ed?
Is the No Labels group getting any traction, or is that going to be a fad that's going to die out?
I hope it's not a fad, Ed. It's a group that's put together. It's a bipartisan group of legislators. I hope it's not a fad. And I'll tell you this. I think we're in a crucial time period of whether or not a group like that I'm a part of can be a force in Washington. And a lot of it's going to come down to whether or not members of that group will sign on to pieces of legislation offered by other members of that group, regardless of political considerations. Because I know you find it hard to believe that the national Democrats and national Republicans don't want people signing up to targeted members' bills. Shocking, isn't it? They don't want the Democrats to sign on to my bills, and frankly, sometimes they don't want the Republicans to sign on to other targeted members like Sherry Bustos' bills. It's going to be up to Sherry and me and that group to begin the process of making sure that they know that we need to work together, regardless of the political considerations, because there's a time for politics, Ed, and we all know that. The campaign is coming, and it's going to be here before we know it. Just wait. You're going to get sick of seeing it, just like I am. But there's a time to govern, and we're in that governing stage right now. We need to work together to make that happen. And I'll end by giving you the political note. You know, back during the last race, I was only a candidate for 5.5 months, so it's the first time we've seen a targeted congressional race in years. So you'll get a kick out of this. My sons, who are 12, they're full 12-year-old boys, the same type of 12-year-old boy attitude. I remember disciplining them one time when I was running for office, and one of them looked up at me and said, "Dad, we don't have to listen to you. TV just told me you're wrong for America." What do you say to that? So, hey, thank you very much, Ben. Thanks for making the trip out today. We appreciate what you do and what the U.S. Chamber does on a regular basis. Todd, keep up the fight. Good luck. Take this with you. You may need it over in Springfield. And Stuart, thank you for what you do on the local level. You guys are great.